You're listening to Dead Air Podcast, part of splatterpictures.net.
What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Knipe here with Always.
Typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're going to be doing the 1977 classic Rituals. Put them back together again. Put them back together again. Put them back together again.
Isn't it a weird chant? Like that is such a weird moment where they evoke almost like a Norse level warrior chant, and they're being drunk fools.
I think that it has a little something to do with the gallows humor you must possess to be in the medical field. I think there's a bit of tribalism. I think there's a bit of getting down to our... They bring a blow-up doll. They go... Of all of the things that they fucking bring to this, they have to go via a boat plane to this remote location, hike through swamps and jagged rocks in the middle of swarms of black flies. And they bring a blow-up doll. Why do they bring a blow-up doll? I don't know. Who actually brings and wants to bring... I would find it weird if you brought a blow-up doll to a bachelor party, because I would just be like, what do you want this thing for? Is this a joke thing? Is this funny to you? They brought it to this extremely remote camping trip, to the point in which during their first big arguments between characters, one of them angrily throws the blow-up doll at the other. Baffling.
I think they're treating it as a nurse, not quite a sex object as much as having the one woman there to take their frustrations out on, perhaps, or to tend to them in at least a metaphorical sense.
So it's a powerful totem, if you will,
yeah,
to represent the only bit of femininity that you will find in this entire hour and 40-minute film.
Well, aside from the one gay dude, which I really love the reveal of his sexuality, but we'll get to that for sure. I have to say, you can't have a ritual without a totem, right?
That's very true. This is a West pick, and I have been really wanting to bring this film to the show for a while, a few years actually, and I was always a bit hesitant because it is horror. I mean, the DVD box says it right across the top. Gothic horror. Horror is right there. But sometimes I feel like, is this splatter pictures enough? Is this dead air enough? It's because are we basically watching a less horrific version of Deliverance, another film which weirdly I never really considered horror until it started getting lumped into, you know, some of the revenge horror films. You know, they talk about it at length in Men, Women, and Chainsaws and stuff like that. And if that's in that book, that's got to be horror, right? So I was always just afraid because I was like, I don't know if this counts. What do you say?
Before we talk about the movie at hand, I just got to say, Deliverance always struck me as being tagged horror because it's got forced anal rape. And that is like so horrific to so many men who are the decision makers as far as what a genre is and stuff like that, it seems to me. Or at least were before the Common Era. And in that case, then Jodie Foster's film The Accused should be a horror film as well.
Don't they? You know what? They also mentioned The Accused in Men, Women, and Chainsaws. So there you go. That's my benchmark. In your
that's where horror lives.
Yeah. If if they mention it in Men, Women, and Chainsaws, a book that I've been revisiting, yes, then it's horror for sure. I think that with this film, there is enough overarching dread throughout the entire thing, and there's so much confusion. And if that doesn't get you, then being afraid of the black flies might be enough.
Yeah, those were not stunt black flies. They're filming this in lovely Batchewana Bay, as you said, on the sunny shores of Lake Superior.
Mm-hmm.
And it is as advertised. It is remote fly-in fishing in the area that they're going, and that's where they filmed. That dam that they visit at the end is real, and part of it still stands, from what I understand. Like, it is a remote, nothing area. There's almost a joke billboard on the way out of Ottawa toward North Bay. There's a sign that says only 957 kilometers to Wawa. This is filmed just outside of Wawa. So, like, it is remote. And you know what? I think it really works as not an eco horror, but a forest horror, where if there were no killers, these guys would still have a bad time.
Mm-hmm. It starts with the most horrific thing of all. It's losing your gear, your precious boots, your feetsies getting just exposed to the elements. That's also fairly horrific. Dear listeners, this is a film, if you are very much into horror and you also happen to be Canadian, this is a film that will likely be introduced to you in one specific way: the Canadian Deliverance. That's how it was first prefaced to me all those years ago. And it immediately got my attention because it made me wonder almost instantaneously, how much in common with Deliverance does this actually have? The question I'm asking is there assault in this film? Sometimes when you're watching these types of revenge films, there's people who don't want to expose themselves to that element. And so I was just extremely curious, and back then the internet was spotty at best, and I thought, you know what, instead of just asking the internet, the almighty internet, this particular question, why don't I seek out the film itself, and then I will see how much in common it has with Deliverance. And honestly, not really a lot outside of the setting. I think that the element that this film and Deliverance have is you have rich, successful urban people coming to the wilderness but instead of like Deliverance, it really is more about the rich interacting with the poor and the rich being at odds with the poor, because they're always talking about in Deliverance the corporation or the company, and they are like raping the land and they're going to gut everything. These guys are just rich, successful doctors, some even from a family of doctors, who are coming down to these elements to go fishing and to relax. It seems to be much like the film The Ritual, where we talk about a group of men who have a yearly trip that since they were young, they go on a yearly trip, and it seems every year things are a little bit different. Now we have a group of 5 doctors who are going to go on vacation. But other than that, not a lot, and certainly not any assault. So if that's something that you're worried about, it really is, it seems to be Canadian Deliverance is more or less shorthand for city people stuck in the wilderness at odds with a local or locals.
Yeah, they have similar trouble in navigating rapids. I think that's the biggest.
That's a good point too.
Parallel. Yeah, that's the biggest parallel I saw. I wish that they had some more name actors. We have Hal Holbrook, which Chris pointed out to me. He'd watched him recently in The Sopranos, and he's been in all sorts of little things. And I vaguely recognized him. I don't have as good of an eye as my husband for that sort of thing. But other than that, I'm like, where's the Estevezes? Where's some other big name actor that could really pull his weight alongside Hal Holbrook, who did amazingly in this film. I wish it had had some larger name talent, but I mean, this particular film is definitely horror because it does have that element of being lost and abandoned in the woods, which is scary. So I consider something like Grizzly Man, although a documentary by Werner Herzog, as like horror because maybe you kind of know how it's going to end up. Like you have a feeling the minute these guys are in the woods, especially once they lose their boots, they're not going to meet up with that airplane when it shows up in 6 days. They're fucked. They're going to be fucked. And it does go on to portray very well guys being fucked. Maybe not literally like in Deliverance, but fucked in the forest. And they're traipsing through muskeg, and all you can hear are the black flies incessantly. And if you've ever been in the deep dark woods in northern Ontario, that sound alone instills fear. It's a scary horrible place to be even for an hour, let alone days. So when they are shivering at a riverside, poking their flashlight beam into shadows in the forest late at night, being soaked and shivering on the second day. Yeah, I'm sold, and I do believe it's horror. And we do have a little bit of gore scenes, and we do have some almost pagan horror. And I do wonder if Adam Neville did take some sort of inspiration from rituals for the ritual, in that it does begin with those men on a ritual. Or was it just some weird artistic happenstance, which I'm always fascinated by when two authors write starkly similar things at the same time, just because they were influenced by events. But there is decades, almost my entire age of difference between rituals and the ritual. But Adam Neville's a very cool dude, so he might have watched this film for sure. It would be the sort of film that he would have watched. So maybe there is some similarity, and he would have watched rituals and being like, okay, where's the pagan ritual that ties this whole theme of men ritualistically going out in the woods together or wherever together with an older sense of the term. He pulled it off very brilliantly. Here, we don't necessarily get that deep into the term. We don't get, into the semiotic of a ritual, but pretty quickly we do get a totem. So yeah, I do consider it horror. It's very subtle, like Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Very much so. But Lydia, before we proceed any further, answer me this. What is this movie even about anyways?
It's not about what you know, the safe route, or knowing that you can overcome the wilderness. It's what you don't know that's going to get you when you don't know that there's bear traps in that river.
Very well put. It is true. One of my favorite elements of this is the fact that you have 5 men, all of whom are successful doctors, all of whom have the knowledge about how the human body works on many different, a lot of them are many different kinds of doctors too. They all have their own special expertise, but they all went to med school, and that all involves the same basic knowledge. So not only do they have survival skills, they also understand, what does it feel like if I'm experiencing hypothermia? What does it feel like if I'm going into shock? Have I hit an artery? Have I not hit an artery? If I'm injured in such a way, what do I do? There's little tastes of that in the film, and I do love that. But you would be forgiven in forgetting that they're doctors, because when they are beginning to be quite literally run down and they are up against a superior foe who understands the wilderness in a way that they don't, how to hunt animals, something that they don't do. You can see how at the end of the day, yes, they are just very human. They don't come off as particularly rustic guys, with the exception of perhaps DJ, who seems to be the author of this particular trip. It seems to be something that they do as a yearly reconnect, because these are people who have known each other. They probably knew each other in med school. I know Martin and DJ are actually brothers, so they've known each other for a long time. But as they have now all aged and they're like pretty much in their mid to late 40s, or one of Martin's in his late 30s, they go to this, they do these trips to reconnect every year. A ritual, if you would. You could easily assume that some of these characters would be completely out of their element, and when they're sitting around and talking before they're about to get into that plane and land into the water, what do they call it? The cauldron. They seem like they won't really enjoy it. And I was getting this sense immediately when they're trudging through that swamp after they land, and Mitzi is being quite fussy about his wristwatch, which I would assume, given his income, that it's probably a pretty expensive watch. It looks gold. And he sinks below the water, and everyone starts laughing, and they're really getting into the thick of it, and they're all enjoying themselves, even though it's wet and dirty and inconvenienced. And you're like, oh, okay, so yeah, these guys look a little soft, and they are doctors. So, but because at the get-go, you'd be like, why would any of them agree to this?
Well, I can understand them having their ritual, especially when doctors had cash to really literally splash. I don't think many doctors, even neurosurgeons right now, they'd be watching this movie and be like, why aren't they just sitting at home doing paperwork? Because that's what I fucking do. I'm not flying around, flying fishing with my dudes for a week or two, because they're going for an extended vacation. It takes you a while to get up to Batchawana Bay alone. Like, it would be a 9-hour drive for me and you if we hopped in a car right now. So like, and we're already in like Ontario, so I don't know where all these doctors would have come from, but yes, like the fact that they can spend that much money and time, I don't know if many doctors can even relate to that, or how much agency they have as doctors is like, well, I'm just going to hop around jobs, and I'm going to run this clinic, and I'm going to own that place. And if they don't want you there, they'll want you at this clinic because you're a golden boy. Like, it was a very different world, I think, in 1977, where doctors were paid a heck of a lot more. Everything was so much cheaper. So they really literally behaving like nouveau riche. And the other thing, like, where they are maybe a little less soft than we perceive, is the war, and the wars plural. So they would have done tours in Vietnam, and Harry talks about that quite openly, and well, sort of, as well as most vets at the time did, because post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't a thing yet, and they were shell-shocked, if anything. And being shell-shocked was something that World War I and II veterans were at the time. So I think a lot of people coming out of Vietnam were even not afraid, but like didn't want to lump themselves in with those old codgers that were seeing things in the dark, because that's what shell shock that's what shell shock meant to them, is that they were out of touch, and they would go and have fugue moments and be scared by loud noises. They didn't want to lump themselves in with that older generation. So I don't think that a lot of Vietnam vets even really admitted that they were shell shocked or had what we know now as post-traumatic stress disorder. So, I mean, there's quite a lot of that coming out in the doctors and newsies, because those were the two sort of professions that a lot of gung-ho men who didn't shake that army life, they could take the guy out of the army, but you can't take the army out of the guy, or whatever they say. They would come back to civvy life and get jobs like surgeons, because that's what they learned in the war, or they would become newsmen because it got them out with gear, out and about in the wilds, in the concrete jungle or something. So this would have been happening around the same time as the Vietnam War. There was other wars going on, like more smaller wars and foreign wars that they were all involved in. And I think that really speaks to the fact that they were a little more capable and not quite as soft as most doctors would probably be today.
Except for Abel. Abel seems very much out of his element.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The poor fella. It's like a George Costanza being out in the forest.
Somebody who, if they were my particular doctor, I might be a little concerned because he doesn't talk about fugue states. He always just seems to not really know what's going on ever, or even the gravity of the situation that he's in. Why are they going so far away, do you think? Now, I'm not suggesting that they should do a drive-up campsite where you're a stone's throw for another human being. But there are lots of walk-up camping sites or portages that are just way more closer to the element or to civilization that will still give you the sense of isolation that you're looking for. But these guys got to be extra, like you fucking read about. They got to get into a goddamn boat and no way in, no way out. It's only 15 miles, but it's such deep, dense, rugged terrain that they're stuck there. And their pilot isn't returning for 6 days. Now, I'm assuming that they don't think anything's going wrong, but when you see what they're doing, some fishing, some drinking, some singing, some dancing, there's a blow-up doll, as we've discussed. Why do they need to be this far away from literally everything?
It's the nature of fly and fishing. It's like, why did doctors go marlin fishing instead of trout fishing at a little brook behind the fire hall on Highway 17? You know, like, why don't they just do that? No, they got to go marlin fishing. They got to go and catch sharks because that's what costs a whole shit ton of money, and that's not something that everyone can do every weekend. And they really need to hit that height because they've not only got the money and the means to do it, they also work extremely hard, where most people don't really understand the amount of sacrifice that a typical doctor, especially like a neurosurgeon or very high paid specialization, the amount of sacrifice in their day. And when they need to blow off steam, they want like a month long, 1 week of just watching talk shows and then 2 weeks of being flown in fishing in the deep, dark, dank muskeg where people don't go. They want to climb Everest, motherfuckers, because they only have that month, and that might be the only vacation they take for 5 years. Unlike these guys that take it every year, but you would expect that they have some fly fishing gear or are after a specific fish, because that's usually what it is for fly and fishing. And I'm not going to lie, I've often been tempted by the idea of a fly and fishing expedition because you get a fantastic hike in a place that other tourists won't be. It'll be quiet. It'll be wonderful camping. It'll be great sights. It'll be glorious, pristine, untouched nature where that maybe 100 people have ever stepped foot before, if any at all. So it's just like that allure. I completely understand.
I think you really hit the nail on the head with that one, especially about the untouched nature element of it all. Their feet aren't necessarily supposed to touch nature in the way that they must. In the very first morning, they have a slight problem. Something creepier than anything else that happens or could happen. It's not that you see a bear in the woods. It's not that you see or hear partying where you shouldn't. It's that you heard nothing, but there's distinct evidence that a human was there, came in and out without your knowledge, and stole 5 pairs of boots. And you would ask yourself the same way that they asked, who would steal 5 pairs of boots? And one of them says, well, $40 a pop for hiking boots. If you could imagine $40 getting you a good pair of hiking boots these days, more like $250. But they think it's for monetary reasons. I would be so fucking creeped out that another human was there more than an animal.
And I like that they kind of jokingly blame it on the boot freak. And I think that's funny that they make jokes of it because they still haven't shaken off that sort of camaraderie, happiness, jovial drinking in the forest, friends together. They don't really get the gravity of the situation that someone has just hit you where it hurts in the middle of that sort of muskeg. Like there's a reason when those two boys murdered a few people and went running into the wilds of Manitoba, and it took weeks for the RCMP and the Indigenous Rangers that also help police the wilds of northern Manitoba. It took them weeks to find them, and they know that area, and they're used to that area, and they're used to going into deep wooded areas and the muskeg, but it's impossible. The sort of thing that looks like a 10-minute walk in the forest might take you a half an hour. So like boots are indispensable.
Well, don't you worry, don't you fret, Lydia, because DJ, who Xeroxed an itinerary and everything that the boys are going to need to have a rip-roaring time in the woods, is all taken care of. The list was as followed. They need an extra pair of shoes, and they need to bring their toothbrushes, and he will take care of everything else. That would, of course, be fine if anyone bothered to look at the itinerary. I think Abel even chimes in with there was a Xerox, or what Xerox? So DJ is the only person who brought an extra pair of shoes, and so let me ask you this, Lids, because I'm not 100% sure. I'm going to put myself in this scenario. And let's say, for the sake of argument, I feel safe enough because I'm with 5 of my friends. And, okay, someone stole our boots. That's pretty weird. My cottage isn't the most isolated place in the world. We've had thefts up there. Someone stole our aluminum boat. It's just, I don't feel unsafe being up there. It's just somebody saw an opportunity when no one was there and they took it. It's too bad. I liked that boat. But would I say, pack up your shit? Okay, DJ, you got to go make a 24-mile hike to this place because we need our boots. Or would I just be like, guys, we're not hiking like until later in 6 days. So is it really a big deal that none of us have shoes right now? We're just kind of like fucking around by this water and fishing. Why don't we just wait the 6 days and we'll hike out of here. We'll wrap up our feet like they do anyways. This sucks, but why do we have to cut the trip short? Why does DJ have to go by himself to this place that maybe there will be people, maybe they'll know DJ's convinced there's going to be somebody at this dam because it's a huge dam. And so they're like, this is not going to be an unmanned thing. Or am I just being like, am I just not putting myself in the situation properly? What do you think?
I definitely think they should have stayed put. So I definitely agree with you. And that would have been my suggestion being out there is not only should we stay put, but can we not track whoever stole them? They've got 5 pairs of boots. So there's going to be like tracks of them walking up to where our boots were and them going away. So maybe we can arm ourselves with the hatchet and gingerly make our way through the forest and maybe see where our boots have gone. Maybe they're just stashed them, off the edge of our campsite. The only thing that makes me think that they have some sense of urgency is maybe they planned to get somewhere else to fish for real. And this is just like the first stop and they meant to hike another stop or two into like a better fishing area. And it would like ruin their whole reason for being there to be at this like little river, which doesn't look like a very fly-in fishing destination to me. But they're not anywhere where there's a boat or anything. So it's not a typical fishing trip in that sense. But like I would have definitely stayed put. So I do agree with you a big time there.
Mitzi is ready to burn the fucking forest down immediately. Immediately. And this,
And literally too. Like you're not exaggerating.
Mitzi's, each one of these guys has a great distinct personality trait without it being cartoonish, I think. Mitzi is definitely the guy that is like, oh, someone stole our boots. Well, we need to get airlifted out of here and we need to get a helicopter. And everyone else is basically telling him to chill the fuck out because that's where the cost of bringing in a helicopter to rescue them, or they don't appreciate rescuing people for being stupid. And this is going to cost us a pretty penny. And if we set a fire, if we literally, because he's like, start a bonfire, just start burning the woods. And they said like, well, they'll lock you up and they'll throw away a key for trying to burn the forest down. And also they rightfully, I should think, is more of the legal aspect of it, which I'm sure, you know, you could say like, oh, things accidentally started. You could come up with a reason about maybe why, like, you would just get slapped with a fine as opposed to going to prison. But like the fact that if you were to light this forest up, it's so dense and so thick, all that has to happen is the wind needs to shift and you guys are toast. You will either suffocate on the fumes or you will burn alive, or both. But it's crazy how that is his knee-jerk reaction. Oh, don't hike anywhere, DJ. Let's just burn the place down.
Which is mental and just not thinking at all. And it seems to me that this guy would have been a lot more comfortable somewhere going to like Mai Tai, Margaritaville, or something like that.
Oh,
he would have
yeah.
been way more in his element than coming out into the middle of a literal bumfuck Idaho, because there's no, like, take a look on a map where Batchawana Bay is. it's pretty remote.
It's insanely remote. They talked a little bit about the previous year's trip where they went to Puerto Rico. That seems like that guy's bag. Sitting on a beach, sipping a beverage, and just being waited on, and you're comfortable and you're clean, and you know you're in a warm place. This was filmed in an Ontario summer, so not only are these not stunt black flies, but for any of our dear listeners who are not from Ontario, I need to emphasize to you that our entire province is a fucking swamp that they paved over. So it is monstrously humid in these woods during the summer, and the discomfort that it would, if someone said, like, let's go to the deep dark woods in Ontario in the summertime, I would be so hesitant to want to do that, because my God, it's hot in the day, it's hot at night, it is humid and wet and just miserable. And these guys are humid and wet and just miserable. And it's such great atmosphere for what's to come. When DJ leaves, they are visited in the night yet again. And this time, a fearsome totem, an aberration of their symbol of medicine with the entwined stakes, show up in the form of a very gross, very real deer head.
Mm-hmm. This is not for the squeamish. People who not only don't like to look at visceral dead animals, but don't like to think about people committing heinous acts toward animals, because there's some talk about some pretty plague dogs level violence against animals later on in the film. But yeah, this catechus totem thing, it's whoever it is tormenting them, and they're very right to call it out right away with being like, we are being targeted, we're being singled out. This is a aberration of the catechus. They know we're doctors. They have something against doctors. And I jokingly, while watching it, was like, you know what, this is all their own fault, because if they would have went in there without being like, who's the better doctor? I'm the better doctor. How much of a doctor are you? Very doctory indeed. Who, like, that's all their conversation the first night. They're basically yelling into the forest, we are doctors, hear us roar. If they would have gone in being like, you know what I hate is doctors, man, they might have been left alone.
This is the craziest thing about this film that I think is really fucking fascinating. And it's that, generally speaking, when you have films where rich suburbanites go to the woods and they encounter the poor, the uneducated, the monstrous creations of poverty and wilderness that horror movie loves to project onto people who are not from the city. If you're not from the city, you are beyond suspect.
That's all it takes.
Yeah.
That's all it takes.
Yeah. It's like, are you from North Bay? You're probably a toothless, cannibal, inbred rapist.
Damn right.
They don't project these men as weak. They're veterans, they're doctors, they're educated people who have lived through horrific things and on the daily basis have to deal with horrific things. They are no strangers to what the horrors and reality of the world are. They are very wealthy and they are coming to this place for a vacation, but it is not the rich versus poor. It is somebody who fucking hates doctors. And the thing about these guys all being in medicine is, holy fuck, can they not talk about anything other than being doctors? I kept thinking about, this is probably what happened. This individual or individuals heard the plane. You hear these men enter your domain, your territory, a place that you have kept to yourself and you're isolated in. And you check them out because you're naturally curious. You don't get many visitors around here. As something to do in the late at night, I'm going to stalk close to them and just observe. What am I observing? They're doctors. I don't like doctors. And I would wonder that this has probably happened several times over the course of this person's life where people enter their domain and out of curiosity, he wants to go and check them out. And then probably observes, well, that's interesting, and then leaves because, they've got other things to do. But he came there and he observed, and what he observed was not only doctors talking about medicine in the grossest, most unscrupulous manner, because they're talking about ethics and they're talking about for-profit medicine and they're talking about they're debating whether or not, they're essentially, what it sounds like to me, debating their Hippocratic oath. And how do they maintain that by still making as much money as possible, and talking about the ethics of medicine itself. And then it just turns into this almost Frankensteinian blood call of put them back together again, and when you find out what's happened to this individual, it is the most triggering introduction to doctors that you could possibly have, where almost all of your hatred and mistrust of people who have this profession would be instantly validated by every way that they're behaving on that first night.
Yeah, they're lucky that he didn't just sneak up and slit all their throats in their sleep. Instead, he wants to fuck with them a little bit or something. Or on one hand, you could say it's some sort of misguided plea for help because he's explaining to them in his way what happened to him.
Which, I love those elements later on in the film. But they think that somebody else is fucking with them. For some stretch of the imagination, they think this is all DJ's doing. They think that this is all some prickety pranks, some little fun time jokey jokes. Martin, his brother, is the only one that is constantly advocating for his brother and saying that DJ wouldn't do this. He wouldn't take their boots, and he certainly wouldn't behead a deer and create this totem.
Instead of staying put, they decide to wrap their feet in bags and tape or whatever and go after DJ and follow in his footsteps, so to speak, and try and catch up with him. I don't know why they decide that this is a good idea. Yes, they're being tormented, but they're being tormented by a person or persons, and they know that. It's not a spirit. It's not an animal. It's not the forest themselves. They're not being ousted by the forest. I still don't get why they don't stay put, because I would still stay put. That's the number one rule of getting found when you're lost in the forest. And they know where their plane's going to be in 4 days now. And they know where DJ went. So they have an idea. They can triangulate these things. And everyone in those parties knows where they could be. You know, DJ, assuming he makes it to this dam, knows where they are and knows where the plane is. The plane knows roughly where they were going. There would be a search and rescue, definitely, that they wouldn't have to pay for, because it could be, at that time, something like, I don't know, maybe $400,000, $500,000 for the search and rescue, and that's what is turning them off. Sure, they can afford $20,000, $30,000 a piece to go in there, but yeah, when it gets to a search and rescue. But if it's a bona fide search and rescue, you're not on the hook for that, right? So they could just stay put.
I agree with you 100%. I don't understand, particularly my attitude with the whole DJ thing was, this man now has 24 hours head start on us. What makes you think that we will catch up to him? It's ludicrous to think that. And if they were to bring a search and rescue team, now we're just lost in the middle of the woods. We don't have our boots. We've wrapped it in shirts and shit like that. But they decide to trudge on anyways. And the absolute snail's pace that they're going, I think they mentioned that they only travel a mile or two in 3 hours. That is not good progress. And Abel seems to be having a good old time, because he's still like, I'm going to take photos. Everyone smile. I brought my camera and this is the trip. And I think he probably has the perspective of, we're all going to laugh about this later. This is going to be one for the books, boys. Don't you worry. Don't you fret. And then the bees, Lydia, the bees.
Not the bees.
It's
yeah, the bees. They had a bee wrangler. I saw in the credits afterward. I was very impressed. They had a bee specialist on set to wrangle, maybe perhaps understand and survey and make sure that they had proper bee etiquette on set.
Holy fuck, is this like bees like you read about it? It always reminded me of, at my cottage there's some larger islands, and I always remember my dad saying that, like, we would go exploring or want to go exploring there, and he would just be like, oh, you boys can't come. You boys can't come. The boys being me and my brother. And he's like, because he's like, you're not going to know what to do if we run into like a bee's nest. My father was terrified of bees because he had fallen onto a bee's nest when he was a kid, and he apparently got stung so severely that he always described it. You wouldn't even be able to put a pin in between all of my bee stings. There were so many bee stings on his body. So my dad was terrified of bees, and he always said, you guys wouldn't know what to do. You would just be swatting at the bees, and you wouldn't know that what you should do is head for water, jump into the water. That's what you need to do when you're after bees. And so when these guys barrel down this fucking hill and they jump into the water, I'd be like, see, Dad, I would have done that too. I know how to jump in the water to get rid of bees. But Abel,
you just told me. You just unlocked the secret knowledge, Dad.
Yeah.
You just told me what I should do. So now I can come, right?
Yeah, no,
like
I
Jesus.
could never come because maybe I'd be too scared in the moment. But Abel makes his way down the hill, but not before they see on the cliff there, Martin sees a shadowy figure, and it's hard to make out what's happening. And oh boy, does Abel hit that ground at the bottom of the river, and he ain't moving. And that's because his neck is broken, and the first of them falls.
Isn't it nice to have doctors all around you to know what happened specifically? And that's one thing I like when someone gets wounded, they're not like, panic, or they're not like, oh, let's stop the bleeding, like, and just handling it in the sort of like that ham-fisted way that most people would. They're like, okay, let me get in there and check. Is the artery severed? No. Okay, you're good. We're going to do this. Like, they just know, and they know what happened, that there's no hope for Abel at all. They don't, they know exactly what happened, and it's just adds to the sadness of it, I think, especially because he was the most jovial, and now all they have left is their booze, really. Their booze and trudging forward.
That's another element of this that I think is really funny. And Mitzi is hilarious in this scene when they, in the scene where they're trying to figure out what they should have for food. What's for din din? And And he just keeps, because Harry is convinced that we don't risk a fire because it's going to give away our location. I'm thinking, and what I know about the movie, I'm like, this guy knows exactly where you are. Whether you have a fire, whether you don't have a fire, you may as well have a full stomach, because he's banking on that fear. He's banking on you not cooking food, so all you have is dates and powdered milk. But Mitzi just being like, well, can't have that. Whoop. That's no good. Fuck, that scene is so fucking funny. And there's a bit of when the stress really starts to pour on for these guys. First, they're miserable. They're debating. But now that Abel has died, they're in really deep shit. Because even though for briefly they do seem to still think DJ might be responsible, they're like, did you see? Why'd you say DJ? Why'd you say DJ? Did you see DJ? And I was like, so are you suggesting, Mitzi, that DJ killed the guy? Like that's part, like, prank? That's his prank? He brought you guys here to kill you?
It's all fun and games till someone gets hurt. Now, do you think that the man stalking them in the forest triggered the bees, or was that just like a lucky happenstance on his part?
In the description, it specifically says that the bees are thrown. So he threw the bee's nest that was on the stick to the location. It was a bee trap.
A bee trap. A bee trap. That's fantastic. As a child, there was a guy that used to want us to not fish in this one stream. And I've asked around of like responsible adults, like, why does he not want us to fish in this stream? Is it because he owns that property? Are we not supposed to be fishing there? And my father said, no, it's literally because he fishes there and you're fishing it out. He wants those fish. And I was like, oh, okay. So then there was this one time when the guy was driving across the bridge looking for us fishing, and we saw him coming. So we agitated a wasp's nest that's under the bridge, a couple wasps' nests. So that it was swarming with wasps. And he drove by with his windows down looking for us and definitely got swarmed by wasps. And we thought it was hilarious.
You're a bee trapper.
We had a bee trap.
You had a full on booby trap. That is what you did. That's hilarious. That's amazing, actually.
We got in trouble because our elders said you didn't know if the guy was allergic to bees or wasps. That's not very nice. And we were like, oh, that isn't very nice. It's potentially very dangerous. But at the time, we thought we were fucking heroes.
You know what? I'm here to tell you, screw this fucking guy. Like, you are heroes. And if he was allergic to bees, maybe he shouldn't have been such a fucking jerk. So now, and by the way, it's like, it could have been worse. You could have, I don't know, snuck out behind him and broke his fucking neck while he was scared of the bees.
Yeah, like this. And like at this point, DJ would have unveiled himself as like, oh, sorry, everything went out of hand. I've killed one of my fucking best friends. Like, that's not, he wouldn't just be like, look at me, I'm so sneaky. Tricksy me.
Mitzi has what I think is a fascinating theory that I really wish that they delved into more. Mitzi is convinced that what they have here is somebody who's out to get one of them. Somebody in this party, and Mitzi's convinced of this, has performed malpractice, screwed somebody over, and they have been stalked to this location, and one of them is responsible for the misery of all of them. He says in this scene that he would sacrifice the guilty party to get himself out of this situation. Really,
which reminds me of Saw or other more modern torture porn type films, which is the road he's heading down with this theory. And I agree. I wish that they would have spent more time delving into this.
The accusations of ethics malpractice, originally they're talking about before they go on their trip, they're talking about like penis enlargement, like what are the ethics of penis enlargement and charging people an arm and a leg and keeping things under the table for that kind of like cosmetic surgery, I guess. I don't know the legalities of any of it. I didn't even think that it would be a problem, but it seems to be something that shady that they're talking about. And it leads me to believe, is there something, they're so ready to start throwing accusations at each other about ethics. Who here has questionable ethics when it comes to their profession? Because they're not saying when push comes to shove, I don't trust you to do the right thing. They're saying, I think that you already have done the wrong thing when push didn't come to shove, when it just suited you to do that. And is it something like Mitzi's projecting because it's exactly what he would do in their place? Or does he know something about somebody else? He does have a bit of dirt on Harry, because not only does Harry talk about being in the Korean War, I think it is, he alludes to this idea that his father was an alcoholic. Mitzi will accuse him of basically use this bit of information to drag him down, and you find out that Mitzi, their father, his father was not Mitzi's father, Harry's father was living in like a halfway house type situation, just really destitute and really on the brink, and was so consumed by his addiction that he died. And Harry had not spoken to him in years, wrote him completely off, and Mitzi was the one that came back and like helped his father, and then ended up being the one that buried him, arranged the funeral, and was the person who was there to make sure that Harry's father, again, Mitzi's not related to him. This is a childhood friend, and who took it upon himself to handle this for Harry because Harry wasn't there. And it seems to be like a really huge amount of animosity between the two men.
It really is, and it's a great story. It's some of these background stories that we get, whether, and in anguish in one way or another, that they talk to one another about, that is so illuminating that these guys have such more deeper relationships. And it also really does speak to the fact that although Mitzi comes across as quite selfish, like, I'm going to sacrifice the fucking person that they're after in a heartbeat to get out of here myself. I'm going to burn down the whole forest to get out of here. All that sort of stuff. Maybe he's not so selfish after all. And maybe he did that the biggest, most selfless thing for a friend or for a friend's father at one point. And he's done his time as far as being selfless. And it's all about Mitzi now. Maybe that's part of his shtick. But there's other stories that they tell in pain, in moments of torment, that are really illuminating.
I really dig this aspect of this film so much. And we also have poor Martin here, who is trying to defend his brother, he's panicked, but he also is an alcoholic. All he really brings with him is whiskey, and he's constantly imbibing and not exactly sober. He reveals in a conversation that he's actually gay, that he quit his practice because he couldn't handle it. All of these little interesting bits of background story, and something about a film coming out in the mid 1970s about a character coming out as gay. And it's not this big reveal where although later on Mitzi does drop the F slur on him.
F word. Yeah.
On him. But it definitely seems to be like they all know this. They all know that Martin is gay. And he talks about his male partner like it as like a matter of fact thing. It's nothing that oh my God, everyone pay attention to this. It's just a really interesting bit of background to this character that it seems oddly extremely progressive in how it's just sort of thrown out there and left behind. He's not a really stereotype.
No, not at all. And in one way, I found like my mother's gay friends were a lot like this. It wasn't like a thing. It wasn't like they weren't coming out. They weren't in the closet to begin with. They were a dude that had boyfriends, and that's how he's talking about like all these other things that were going wrong at the time in his life that he's talking about. And he's like, and then my boyfriend leaves me, and what do you expect? Like, what would you do? You know, like it replaced the word boyfriend with mate, and it wouldn't even register whatsoever. But it's just, yeah, it is refreshingly progressive for 1977 for it not to be treated like anything. And I think that's where we were really headed back then. And I don't know what changed that brought the hate again in between that time. Because, like, I mean, aside from Stonewall, which probably would have happened around the time and not long after, perhaps.
A little earlier, yeah, like that. That was like that was the
earlier?
early 70s. I think Stonewall.
Oh, so that was before I was born.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what changed because we were seemingly on a path. Maybe it was just here in Canada, and maybe only up in the muskeg deep dark forest where we're really open about that sort of thing. And even when the F word is used later on, it's not like an attack necessarily. It's like some people throwing around the N word in a not a fun way, but like a familiar way. I think that's more of how it was used.
It's possible. I think that there's the hyper conservatism of the 1980s was just, there always seems to be like this fits and starts, ebbs and flows of progression. And in the 1970s, when things are heading that way, all of a sudden special interest groups kick up and they're like, whoa, 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 slow down here. And then the hyper conservatism reaction to that pushes things back. And I think, like, you know, we see that nowadays too, where it's just like hyper conservatism just pushes so hard back on anything that could be possibly deemed as fucking progressive. But yeah, Mitzi does drop that F slur, and Mitzi is such a fucking hard character to figure out, because in the one hand, he's so matter of fact about how selfish he is. And in a weird way, I respect that. I respect the fact that he was just like, he says one line very concisely, I want to live. I want to live. And that's why he is behaving the way that he does, because they have something that is going to occur that is really going to put a fucking divide in it. Martin says this very interestingly after this occurs, but they see a rope crossing the river, and they surmise that DJ himself has left this rope to help him traverse the rapids. Now, these rapids aren't very deep, but the current themselves would be quite strong, and there's a lot of rocks here. They're slippery, and you could lose your footing and then get swept away, and that'll be the end of you, particularly since they haven't really had anything significant to eat in a couple of days now, and they're tired, and they've been hiking, and their feet hurt because they're fucking barefoot. And now they traverse this river, and amongst this, as they very sloppily, shakily make their way across here, I mean, Jesus Christ, like, they're so unsure-footed. I was like, does the rope even help? Like, they look like they're fucking about to fall down. There's bear traps all across underneath this water that have been laid there for them, and Martin, unfortunately, is the one that gets nicked. The cut misses his artery, but his ankle is broken.
I think it would have been more effective too if they wouldn't have shown us an underwater shot of the bear traps. I like this. I like this a lot. The fact that somebody has laid a whole bunch of bear traps in this river, because I mean that would be sort of effective hunting too, especially if this is a spot where deer cross this river often. So it couldn't all be just traps for them. It would be actually useful on a day-to-day basis for someone living out there. But the fact that it is literally traps for them is great, and that there's so many of them. I think that they could have figured this scene a little better. Now, we're heading into some river rapids bullshit, and every time they lose somebody, they seem to lose a backpack too. And it's not always the backpack off that person. It's the backpack off the person who drops their backpack to run and help them. Or in this case, they're all in the middle of this sort of shallow rapids with rocky, and it's all glacial till. That's one thing about this environment is that it's not great big rocks where you can billy goat your way around them. It's a bunch of weird little rocks everywhere. And there's rocks upon rocks. So when you fall, you're falling into rocks, and your next sure-footed step is going to be on more tipsy rocks. So it's like there's no way that they could keep their footing, I don't think, even in shallow rapids like this. So when one of them falls, they're all are upset about it. Like they're all upset, like literally they can't find a good spot to step, and helping one another is extremely precarious when you could just fall into the water yourself too. And that he's screaming like a child. I think their reactions are really good too. I mean, you've had a lot of criticism on other movies where somebody gets hurt or dies and everyone's like, well, got to keep moving on.
Yeah.
They stop and take a moment at least with this sort of stuff.
I even give them credit for how Abel dies because, they're doctors. They have lost patients. They have. Some of them are veterans. So that they have seen death and they know what death means, and they know that coddling Abel's body at this juncture is just not going to help them. They need to move on. And so they give it what I feel is an appropriate amount of time. But yes, this whole notion of like, in some other horror movies, someone gets stabbed in the shoulder or stabbed in the like a severe stab in the thigh, and it hurts for that length of a scene. And then once that scene is over, they have like a bandage, like a bloody bandage, or they have like a bloody shirt, and you can't even see where a puncture wound would even be anymore, because there's a fantasy element to all of this violence, which it's almost like you're in Mortal Kombat. It's like no one ever really dies, even if you rip their head off. So this instead has very practical, realistic things where Martin is going into shock and Martin is delirious, and this breaking his ankle in this environment at his weakened condition, they have to set the bone. I like how in casual conversation, they don't need to say like, all right, Mitzi, now you get behind him and you start setting the bone. Mitzi does it wordlessly, and Martin knows what is going to do, and Harry knows what to do, and all Harry says to him is like, which way you want your instep facing? And then Martin has the hilarious line of like, be gentle, and they set the bone, and it's just done so fucking well. And you get this element of like, okay, there's still camaraderie here. They're doctors, they're professionals, and their expertise is helping them progress forward. Now their notion is to float Martin down the river, because carrying him through this thick brush is just not possible. So they create a raft for him and they go through it. Fun fact, evidently this river walk scene took 5 days to shoot, and Hal Holbrook complained heavily about how physically demanding this role actually was. And listen, it looks physically demanding. This does not look like this was a cakewalk shoot. This looks like it was a miserable shoot where you were out there in that wilderness and you just so happened to be with a crew and getting those shots. But holy shit, does this look slow and precarious and dangerous, and the rapid situation just keeps getting worse.
It is. And if you look on a map, which I took a nice little tour on Google Maps of this area, because no way have I driven up that far north. I've gone pretty far north. I've gone 5 hours, 6 hours, maybe closer to Timmins and points north from there. But I've never gone on these little goat paths to places as far as Wawa or Thunder Bay or Moose Factory. I've never gone like that far north ever. But looking on Google Maps, where this dam is, that where DJ went and where they end up, looking at the river that goes north, that must have been the river that they were on. It looks like it was probably the river they were on. It's so desolate. And to be filming this, like, I don't know how long all of the filming took, but I can full on believe that this little river scene took 5 days, from the time that they fall in the river to the time that they end up coming ashore finally. I mean, yeah, it is desolate, nothing. the fact that we hear so much black flies and they refer to the black flies, they're constantly swatting at one another. It's not for show. There's literal black flies everywhere. It is I wouldn't want to be out there for an afternoon, let alone what it must have been like a 15-day shoot. It's a very long shoot.
Oh man, you want to know how long this shoot took? You're never going to guess.
7 days? It's either 7 days or 35 days.
From June to August.
Yikes.
June to August. Now I would assume that they took breaks, but man, that is the entire summer in shooting this fucking movie in probably some monstrously hot days, monstrously miserable days. This boils over Martin's situation. Mitzi's not just flirting with, but talking about leaving Martin. Like, this is too much. He's finished. He's in shock. He's super drunk, barely coherent. And he seems to be, he's flirting with this idea of like, come on, like it's too much, right? There's too much to take this guy. But this turns into Harry and Mitzi coming to blows, while at the same time Martin now is losing his grip and heading down the river. And you think, oh my God, here we go. Like they're going to get Martin killed. He's going to go down the rapids. He's going to go over the falls. Something's going to happen in which he dies. But they manage to get him back together, and they manage to get back onto shore. And this is where, very interestingly, you think they're almost out of the woods, because they make their way to the edge of this forest, and they make their way to, like, it's almost like this desert looking place. It's nothing but open rocks and shit, but not before they're paid a little visit, because as Martin is not conscious, laying there in the woods, all bundled up on their stretcher that they've created for him, somebody goes ahead and leaves a World War II medal pinned to his chest.
Absolutely terrifying. And it's very much the whole snipping a piece of your cloak off when you've been marked for death. Like, he could have killed him. He could have killed any of them at any minute. And it's really reminding them of that with that simple fact. And also another clue as to the identity of their stalker.
The World War II element is so jarring to me as somebody who's living in 2024, because if you were to say, oh, they're a World War II veteran, my brain instantly says, what are they, like 100 years old? Like, what are you talking about? They're a World War II veteran. Oh, right. This came out in 1977. So it's very possible that a World War II veteran would be older, but still quite able-bodied. And there's this intrigue, this level of intrigue that he could kill them anytime that he wanted. And Martin expresses this as he is drunkenly musing before he lapses unconscious, because there's a point in which Martin is going to lose consciousness and, he'll never have another bit of dialogue anymore. And he starts backtracking what exactly has happened to them, about how they've been run down. It starts with their shoes. It starts with separating DJ, the most experienced wilderness person, away from them. It starts with making them walk. It starts with making them fear and using the bees, dwindling their numbers, dwindling their resources, laying that trap across the river. All of these things designed to run them down against a superior numbered foe, hunting them as if they were like bears or other sort of like apex predators, and doing so in a way that is also fucking with them mentally, because he wants them. He doesn't just want to kill them. If he wanted to just kill them, he would. He wants them to suffer. And this element of the World War II metal starts to give you an inkling about perhaps why.
Now, Martin, in his delirium, was telling himself a story as he's being dragged through the forest about how you make a gorilla salute. And it is the most terrible story. And I remember my father and my uncle sometimes have these stories of when they were young, or stories from these sorts of dudes, these World War II veterans that had come back a little crazy, and some of the shit they would get up to. And once in a while, and more so as I get older, because I've not only heard these stories a couple times, I know that as I got older, though, they got worse, because as my maturity level and my sensitivity to these sorts of stories became a little more tough. I suppose my father would tell me crazier stories. And lately I've been like, you know what? I don't think I want to hear the rest of the story. And that's how I felt when Martin was telling the story of how you make a gorilla salute. And it has to do with torturing other animals in front of it. And it really does set the tone for what they believe that they're being put through by this person. And it is a story that he had heard during wartime, and this person is definitely from that exact same era. So it stands to reason that they're using these exact same sort of tactics on them. And it is that sort of story where I wanted to say, you know what? I don't think I want to hear the end of this story. I really don't. Although you know that it ends up with the gorilla saluting, because that's, or you want to believe that's what it ends up with. It's just terrible. And it is about what they're being subject to. They've been hobbled, they've had broken ankles, they've been straight up killed. Like, it is torture. Is that what they want? Is that what this person is after? Is them to pay them respect? Or is it literally they're just torturing them until every single one of them is dead?
It will become more clear when they reach this clearing. And you would think that it would be slow going, but carrying a full grown man, I don't know if you've ever had to carry weight like this for an extended period of time. I have. And you are not prepared for how worn down your arms and upper body become, to the point in which it is burning, absolutely burning, to keep a grip, to keep your muscles activated. They're dehydrated. Let's start there. They're starved of nutrients. Let's continue with that. And this is an ongoing, enduring pressure of weight on their front and their back. And I just, holy fuck. Like, I would even suggest that it might be easier to just have one person drag, and they could take turns while the other person rests. But man, even though I agree with Harry's aspect or perspective of, like, he is trying to strip us of our humanity. He is trying to see if we'll leave him. And I also like how Harry slowly, like, kind of starts off in the movie looking quite nebbish, looking quite like you couldn't even imagine him going to war, and just very slowly just turns into a Korean war vet. He's got the bandana, he's got the khaki vest, he's, you know, they all have, like, you know, 10 o'clock shadows now, and they're filthy, and he really does look like, and, you know, he's like cooking and looking around, and you could see he's back in this survivalist mentality, but he is not going to sacrifice his humanity and leave Martin behind. Well, the entire time, Mitzi is almost looking for permission. He's the devil on Harry's shoulder saying, we need to leave him. I want to live. I'm not going to carry him anymore. And the straw that breaks the camel's back is when they sleep, they rest in the middle of this, like, rocky clearing area. And Mitzi was supposed to keep watch. He fell asleep because he's exhausted. I don't even blame him for that. And when they awake, they are confronted with the severed head of their dear friend, Abel.
which is so grotesque. And the reaction here is pretty realistic. They don't just recoil in horror. They grab it and they throw it and they remove it, and they're angry. They're scared, but they're angry. And I really like that reaction. I really like this as far as the macabre, grotesque gore aspect of it. And is one of the scenes that really nail it into the horror genre, I'd have to say.
They also have the element, a little extra element that only would be useful to a doctor. And I think our assailant might know this, or he definitely knows this, is he leaves behind an X-ray. And I like that they don't spell it out for us. I like that Harry looks at it into the light, and he just sort of is like, what butcher did this?
Yeah. I love that scene too. And it really does explain, in a way, what they're up against in that vague way of whoever they're up against is not only angry, but could very well be, Frankenstein. I like, that's a rude way to put it, because Frankenstein was actually a benevolent creature, and a lovely creature.
Severely disfigured, let's say.
Disfigured, or it could have affected them beyond shell shock. Mm-hmm. They could have some sort of really deep derangement that only a doctor looking at that X-ray and referring to that job as butchery would fully explain. It's like, we never need to see this person to know they're a monster.
And we find out that they aren't paying for any one crime that they committed. They are paying for the crimes of other doctors. And this person is drawing no distinction between these people now and those people then. Doctors fucked him up. And so if you're a doctor, you are beyond suspect. And he will get his revenge on doctors. Harry talks about how this psychological warfare that this person is putting them through, he hasn't even begun to start. And I like this line because it's like he sees 5 steps ahead of him about how much he wants to break them before he would even think about killing them. This is almost like a sick game, a sick test, and Harry's not going to lose. And the thing that I like the best is Mitzi, instead of Mitzi convincing Harry to throw it all away, we can get out of here. You and me, we're able-bodied, we're healthy, we still have a chance, but if we're taking care of Martin, we can't survive. And Harry says, maybe not, but we're going to do it. He doesn't literally say that. It's all through action. And there's no dialogue exchange. This shows incredible, in my opinion, restraint by the writers and the directors and the actors to just demonstrate that Mitzi is moved and won over, or perhaps guilted, either way, into resuming helping carry Martin's body. And I fucking love that moment.
I like how they portray the utter exhaustion too of dragging him through the thing. So Mitzi's argument is valid. It's not like he's having a fine time dragging him through the forest or through this rocky till clearing. It's absolutely excruciatingly hard, and I don't think that they could sustain it any further anyway.
Well, good news, Lydia. You don't have to worry too far because they have reached the dam and savior and civilization is upon them. Credit. Oh, wait, not credits.
Yeah. Oh, sir, what you would think. The place is abandoned as hell and has been abandoned since probably the 1920s.
It's completely dilapidated. The one of the main structures doesn't even have a roof anymore. And Mitzi's reaction is great. He just starts bawling his eyes out. And that, what are we going to do now, Harry? It's that desperation. And you could tell that, okay, if I was in that situation, I would be like, hey, next hill. We just got to get to the dam. Get to the dam. That's what we said. We left our campsite to get to the dam. DJ went to the dam. When we get to the dam, that's it. We'll be fine. And then you get to the dam. It is not the salvation that you were looking for. And not only that, but we have encountered our dear lost friend, DJ, mercilessly nailed to a chair.
Now, maybe this is where it's firmly planted in horror. The perpetrator, the stalker, the creeper, to the original title of this name, or an alternate title, the creeper, the person creeping on them, has put this guy in traction, which isn't something that we would know until a doctor tells us that. And luckily, we have a couple. And they're like, oh my God, they've put him in traction. That's mental. And the state that he's left in, and that he is not entirely dead. It seems to be that he's being kept somehow partially alive. Almost as horrific. And if this movie were to ever be remade, I think that this would be the set piece that is the most horrific. Sort of like in the movie Seven, when we encounter somebody everyone is pretty sure is dead, and they're not quite dead. I mean, it is horrific. And the fact that he's sat there strapped to this chair for, I don't know, probably 2 days is scary in and of itself. He's been black fly food for all this time, left to the elements. And like when Wes has mentioned a few times how hot and humid it really gets here, it's not just a global warming thing. I remember being a small, like 10 to 13 years old, and having days in the summer where you couldn't breathe. Couldn't breathe. It was so hot. So it gets very, 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 very warm, especially in the open elements.
Absolutely. And so Harry does the only thing that he can think of to do, and that is to put him out of his misery by killing him in one of the slowest ways possible. Let me just slowly choke the life out of you, dear DJ, dear friend. Thankfully, Martin is not conscious to see his brother get slowly throttled to death. This is too much for Mitzi. He is disillusioned, or maybe even a little afraid of Harry, who he saw with that icy, faraway stare. And it almost like, if what we know about PTSD now, we could ask ourselves, is he there? Has Harry gone all the way back? Is that what Mitzi sees in this man? I don't think so, but I think Mitzi might be afraid of that, because to me, it seems as though he just left because this is just too much. He just saw one of his friends kill another one of his friends. It was a mercy killing. It was a mercy killing. But, I'm sorry.
No, and it was like, like you said, the most merciful killing ever. Like, it's the worst strangulation. Although maybe strangulation goes a lot quicker when someone's dehydrated, emaciated, and has been left to the elements and is half dead already. Anyway. It's like you're just going to go to a forever nap. That lightheadedness, embrace it, go to sleep. He dies. And when he brings Martin to the shelter, such as it is, it's better than nothing. He kind of tells his friend through tears, I'm going to come back for you, but I can't carry you anymore. And sadly, that's not going to be a problem anymore, because in this time of putting Martin into the shelter, he unfortunately has succumbed to shock and the elements themselves, and he goes along with his brother to the great beyond. And there quite a tender holding of the hand as Harry sort of like rubs his finger over his friend's hand and pulls away from it. It's quite moving. It's really great. I like these. Man, like, I fucking love this movie, man. Like, I think it's the parts of it that are really brilliant are great. There's only one thing I don't like about it, and we're getting to that. Harry is going to look for Mitzi and also just try to find something to get him out of there, and he's going to come across a cottage. A cottage is putting it very rose-tinted, I'd say. Okay. It's a hovel. It's a hermit haven. It's a shack. Yeah. It's more of a shack than a cottage. And I mean, you could call it like a hunt camp or something like that. Is maybe more. It's a shelter.
It almost
it's a crude shelter.
it almost looks like it was at one point like an old ice fishing shed, and it got
Yeah.
and they just planted it there, and they say, look, a dwelling.
It's not like a homestead of any sort. Although, I mean, I guess if you're living like Jason Voorhees style in the forest, that's about all you need, right? Like it's working, and it's working for two people, for crying out loud. But yeah, I can see Mitzi being terrified of Harry. I'm a little terrified of Harry. And for all their little war stories and their stories of being doctors and stuff, when Harry begins telling a story about his time in the war, he doesn't actually finish the story. And that's more terrifying, because I remember being a kid sitting at the round table in the Royal Canadian Legion, and when the old dudes didn't finish their story, you knew to just give them space, offer to refill their beer, whatever it was, not ask them the end of that story. No way, no how. And this is the state at which Harry is at this time. So he's a little scary. He is more than a little scary. I think that he fits in now with the new friends he's about to make, though.
He really does. He finds this shack, this hovel. Hovel's a good word for it, really. And there's all kinds of clues. And this is, oh boy, I kind of wish they pulled the taffy on this a little bit more. They only dedicate a couple of minutes to it. It's enough to paint this vague picture, which makes a lot more sense when you look at it from the perspective of what you actually informed me of before we recorded this episode about a different ending, per se, or how, like, there was at odds with the original story. He goes through and he finds himself some food, and he's like, like a little bit of food. And why he doesn't immediately think that this could be the den of his tormentor, like why he wouldn't initially think that is kind of beyond me. But he might just be so happy that he found himself a spot of meat, deer or whatever it is. It's cooked, it's good, he's starving, and he's looking around, and then he starts to see, he takes out like a ledger of some kind, and there's old photos from World War II. There's more medals, and then he looks under that bed there, and that's 5 pairs of boots. And
Yeah.
before you know it, before you can even blink or process what is happening, he is under attack by a dirty old man, a scary looking dirty old man.
Well, I hesitate to say he's dirty looking. He has kind eyes, or one kind eye. But he's blind, so his like eyes have no choice but to be kind, I suppose. But I really wish, like you said, they pulled the taffy here, because strapped to DJ was another X-ray, so they have gotten more clues as to the state of their person. And there was army discharge papers, like military discharge papers, so they have the name Matthew Crowley attached to their tormentor. So they could have looked for more clues. If there would have been more photos, we could have gotten an idea of what this person looked like definitively, because we're not sure. It would have said on the paperwork what rank he was, so we could have discerned. Especially in 1977, it's a little more top of mind. We would have been able to look at these photos and discern what rank they were, where it would take us a little bit of research to do nowadays, especially us not being from military backgrounds. So I really would have liked to spend more time in this hovel. Finding the shoes, terrifying. You could have spent another 3 minutes in there, please.
The Matthew Crowley of it all, great name, by the way,
It is.
owes a lot to things, more to things like The Hills Have Eyes, in my opinion, even though those films came out in the same year. So I don't think that they're derivative of each other in the sense that someone was ripping somebody else off. I think that would be a huge, wild stretch of the imagination to say that. But it does remind me more of The Hills Have Eyes because of the Matthew Crowley element. But this is not Matthew Crawley that we're encountering right now. This is Jesse Crawley. This is his brother, his blind brother, who knows what's going on and is attacking this person blindly with a cane while Harry is trying to defend himself with a piece of furniture. And in the ensuing struggle, which is incredibly chaotic, I don't know if this scene needed more light or if they needed to pull back a little bit or what. I understand that this shack was an existing structure. This was a filming location for an old television series from like the 1960s or whatever. So they didn't really have a lot of control over any of the art direction of this place. It was a very small looking area, but it's just so hard to parse what the fuck is going on. And you almost forget that Harry will plunge a fucking axe into this motherfucker, and he's just gonna go to bed like Yoda while he's wistfully telling you that Matthew's a good guy, he provides, it's just, it's almost like, don't hold this against him, but he's dangerous, so you got to get out of here because he's dangerous. He's a good guy, but he's dangerous. But he's a good guy, but he is dangerous, but he is a good guy. And then he just fucking dies.
Which I'm like, was he dying beforehand? Like, is this little wound way more grievous than we are led to believe? It all happens so very fast. It is shoehorned in, and it really feels that way. There's many complaints about the darkness, and there's even a part in here where Harry finds an oil lamp and lights it. And I'm like, oh, good, some light. We're gonna crank up the lights, and you can put on some other lights to like go along with this little camp light. But no, it doesn't help at all.
No, it's like a light in some of those Blumhouse haunted house movies where they turn on like a desk light and it just does not illuminate anything. The room is just as dark as it was before. And I was like, that's not how lights work, guys. This is the same thing. A lantern in a shack this size should be more than adequate to light this place up. But speaking of getting lit up, guess who's hanging from a tree?
Mitzi, our pal Mitzi, Mr. Selfish Selflessness. He is screaming for help. And he's behind me. I can't see him. He's lighting a fire. He's gonna burn me alive. That's how the conversation basically starts, and that's how it continues to go.
This aspect of the film is like, this movie is as serious as a fucking heart attack. Serious as cancer, because rhythm is a dancer. Except for this is so fucking hysterical to me, where you have a man, this sequence of Mitzi hanging while an assailant we can't see slowly builds a fire, slowly starts to light it, while Mitzi is effectively negotiating for his own life for Harry to come out of this shack and fucking help him. Now, to be fair, Harry has had an artery nicked. There was a point in which an arm with a blade poked in through a hole in the door, and it nicked Harry in the thigh, and apparently it nicked his artery. And he's yelling this out to Mitzi. Mitzi's like, if you come and cut me down, I'll help you tie it off for you. I'll try. Like, Mitzi is literally trying to negotiate with Harry for his own life, while Harry, I understand the narrative. Okay, the narrative is this: Harry had his artery nicked. He's incredibly weak. He's malnourished. He's dehydrated. He is going into shock. He is trying to cauterize his own wound. I understand the story elements. No one needs to fucking explain it to me. It fucking comes off as ridiculous when how much time is spent on this fucking scene while he just keeps telling Mitzi to shut up. I'm doing something here. Well, he's just doing it as slowly as possible. And there seems to be so much time to rescue Mitzi. And he just fucking doesn't. And Mitzi goes from like describing, like nothing's happening, something's happening, describing what's happening. The fire is on. I'm starting to burn. And then he just burns alive. And then while Harry's like fucking MacGyver here, cauterizing his own wound, and then like sees, like finally finally, after minutes of Mitzi explaining to him what's happening, he sees Mitzi burning like an effigy, and he's like, almost, oh, Mitzi, no. I was like, he was telling you this whole time that this was happening.
It reminds me so much of that very tragic 911 call of a girl whose car got swept away and the water is rising, and she stays on the phone with 911 for quite some time until she does perish. But it's a minute by minute, like, this is how high the water is. I know I'm going to die. This is what's happening. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And not a lot of movies can get away with this sort of tension building, because it is sort of tension building, and it is frustrating, but it's frustrating in a good way to me. I think it really works, actually, with this is what's happening behind me. There's nothing I can do about it, but you with a gun can do something about it. Come and help me. What's the most absurd to me is that Harry's decided to cauterize his wound by using black powder. So he's going to use one of his shotgun shells, empty the black powder onto his wound, and light it on fire. I'm like, dude, is there not like a nail or something around here? You're going to sanitize it by heating it up white hot with the fire. You have fire. You have a lantern. You have fire. You can cauterize it. All you need is something metal, and no doubt there's metal stuff all over the place here. You can tie it off with the bootlaces. Like, how about putting on some boots, for crying out loud? You have 5 pairs now. So, like, he's got some choices, but no, he decides to empty black powder onto his wound, and it doesn't tickle. It's not like he puts the black powder on and lights it on fire and he's good to go. It's an excruciating pain and a terrible traumatic event. He could pass out doing that and be no help to anybody. So it's just like a bad decision all around.
And a time-consuming decision as well. This doesn't ruin anything for me. It is what I consider to be the weakest element of the film. However, you've shed some light on why this might be the weakest element of the show. Would you like to share with the rest of the class what you learned?
Yes, I would. Now, we are not privy to the director commentaries of this film, unfortunately. I watched it on Amazon. It was also on YouTube. It had been on Shudder. It's not anymore, but it's available here and there. But yeah, Amazon had a really cool copy. Of course, there's no extras with that, and I didn't like seek them out either. But there is a write-up in the book, the Canadian horror film Terror of the Soul. It's edited by Gina Freytag and Andre Louisel, and our friend Sean Moreland has writing in this, and that's why I picked it up originally, but it's proven indispensable when we're talking about Canadian horror films. And there is a whole essay on rituals by Mark R. Hassan, who I'd not read this entire thing because I thought it wasn't in this book at all, because at the end there's a film list. There's no index, but there's a film list, and Rituals is not in the film list. So idly flipping through some of the other eco-terror, forest terror, Canadian wilderness horror films, I stumbled upon the essay on the friggin' movie. So in this essay, they go to explain what I found so fascinating, and kind of explains a lot of this shoehorned cabin scene of this film. As Sutherland recalled, who was the writer of this, we were forced by the government funding body, so I guess it would be what turned into the National Film Board, to put in a bad guy. So they were forced to put in a villain. In the original script, in the end, you don't know who it is. They wanted an explanation, and it was no use trying to explain to them that films aren't always filled with explanations. Sutherland wanted a similar level of ambiguity as was present in Picnic at Hanging Rock. And I've talked about Picnic at Hanging Rock a couple times. It's not splatter pictures-y enough, and it's not horror-y enough. It's just kind of surreal that I think it's a little too soft. But this kind of fills that gap where they really wanted to have that ambiguous ending. So because of the funding, they were forced to shoehorn in a real villain. And I'd like to see exactly what sort of elements other than this cabin scene were shoehorned in, because I think you could really leave this film 100% entirely intact and take out Jesse Crowley, and, you know, still have Harry encounter this cottage, still have Harry find the shoes and see the pictures and all that. Maybe they have a name to him because of the discharge papers, maybe not. they get to see him when he busts through the door, then gets shot in the hand by Harry. So they get to see their assailant, but I think that they wouldn't get the explanation of he doesn't trust doctors. Oh, you're those doctors. I told him to stay away from you. And like get that sort of like almost feeling of closure by having met some of his kin and being told he's not a bad guy, that he provides and all of that stuff. I think it would have been served so much better to be left ambiguous.
I agree. And I think that you could omit the character of Jesse altogether. You could even include the x-rays, and maybe an eagle-eyed viewer could see the Matthew Crawley on the x-ray film, and then have the burning, because the conversation before Mitzi burns alive, it's an incredibly interesting way of doing this where you never hear Matthew Crowley's voice. You only ever hear what Matthew Crowley wants as interpreted through Mitzi. It's like a pokeroo element. Like, oh, what's that? Oh, what pokeroo says this? He wants his brother Jesse. Now Harry can't provide Jesse because Jesse's dead, but you could have just had everything more or less intact. Maybe have Mitzi say different dialogue because we don't have the Jesse character anymore. And then burn him alive, see the horror and the aftermath of Mitzi going up like a candle, and then perhaps even have the hand come into the door and we see Harry take aim and fire, and it's an incredibly horrific blast him off at the wrist, and it's still kind of dangling. If you want some gore, here's some more for you. And you could say that enough was if my hand got blown off, like, you have way bigger problems because you are going to die from blood loss and shock. You don't have time to take down a man. So you go off into the woods. Harry makes it to the highway, credits, and we never see it. But I would wonder what they were drawing this from in the sense of horror. If we keep this firmly gripped into wanting to have villains, obviously, since the beginning of storytelling, we have villains in things, so we don't necessarily need to have an overt bad guy. But there is something so particular about the look of Matthew, where again it draws me to something like The Hills Have Eyes, even though again they're not informing each other because these films came out the same year. We are just on the cusp of the slasher boom. So villains like that, even though there's some proto-slashers, things like Savage Weekend and Prey and Black Christmas and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you have characters like that did exist within cinema before Michael Myers and all the rest came tumbling down. But there's something very particular about this. And maybe Texas Chainsaw is a good point in which maybe they said, well, we want a bad guy like that. Make him like a scary sort of mountain man thing. And we have this horrifically scarred individual who's like essentially missing half of a face. It's all healed over. He has no dialogue that we ever hear because he is shot in the hand. He comes in and and Harry just shoots him one more time, double taps him, and that's the end. Harry has now lost everyone and makes it up to this beautiful shot on this highway. And then we just start rolling credits. But I really think it's a shame. I love the movie as it is, but there's something so intriguing that I think this would elevate it to a survivalist masterpiece if we just had so much less information about Matthew Crowley and Jesse Crowley.
I really agree. Or if they would have just reconciled the fact that the real villain in the story, or the other villain in the story, is the Canadian wilderness, and they're up against a tremendous foe that they have no chance of winning against ever. And that's really the big villain here. But I think that they either, I don't know if it's that they didn't realize how really formidable the foe and the villain of the Canadian wilderness comes across in the film, because it really does. It really does come across as a treacherous, evil, insurmountable foe. More so even than Matthew Crowley, because they could run away from him somehow. The plane's coming eventually. They're going to have the one up on him eventually. Now, I really do like the inclusion of the dog tags. They show the round dog tags in this, which are distinctly Canadian. And they remind me that, you know, we have this idea sometimes of World War II that it's all dudes with metal hats and trenches and people in real uniforms and looking at maps and using radios and all that stuff in actual frontline warfare. But there were special forces operatives, and there was a joint Canadian and U.S. task force that was paratroopers that were taught assassination skills and bush mountaineering skills. And the idea was that you drop them near enemy lines in the middle of the forest where other army factions aren't looking, because it's inhospitable terrain that you can't get across and you can't get a platoon across. But you drop like 2 dudes in this muskeg in Italy, and they make their way across enemy lines over the course of 2 weeks with like a very specific target to assassinate at night in his sleep. And then you steal away into the forest like ghosts. And it's a very real special forces task force. And I'm thinking I think this is what they're trying to get at, that this is what this guy was. And not only was he very specialized and trained to live in this sort of way and to sneak up and torture people and kill people at night and torment them terribly, because they were all a little touched, but they were all like biathletes, triathletes kind of thing. And I think that that's what they were getting at without saying as much. And it's something that maybe isn't as recognizable to audiences today. I'm very excited to watch this with my dad and uncle and see what they have to say about it.
That would be really cool. And I want you to report back to me when you do that, because I think that would just be really cool. But there's something, what you just said, what struck me was just there's yet another element that makes this so uniquely Canadian. And we spend a lot of time as horror fans spending time about like talking about films from the United States, films from Italy, films from all over the world. And even we talk about Canadian horror films that are scrubbed of their Canadianness, and they are meant to basically be like they're just taking place in the United States. And you have to be the eagle-eyed person that says to yourself, oh, you know, you can tell this is in Canada because of this or that or this. You can tell this is filmed in Toronto. And you have to find these little Easter eggs for yourself. And in this film, just the whole thing is not just Canadian, but so Ontario. And then, you know, even that last highway shot, that's old Highway 27, Kleinburg, Ontario. And then what you were saying about the dog tags, I didn't even put that together, because I don't even think I knew that. Or if I did, I forgot about the fact that we didn't have the dog tags that you see in Saving Private Ryan or something like that. So just, again, another really cool element.
There was screenings done here in Ottawa of Rituals when it was being released in the early, I suppose it would be early 1977. And if you look at the Wikipedia, you'll see a link to newspapers.com, an old Ottawa Citizen article that reads, instead of advertising the film, they gave out reaction cards to the screening audience, asking for opinions about the theme, the music, the acting, direction. And I don't think that those sorts of focus groups were usually conducted outside of Los Angeles. I don't remember hearing about those being conducted here. So I thought it was really interesting. And they did request some demographics of the person. So they cut the film off before the credits ran, because they didn't want to hear negative remarks that they knew they would get once the audience knew that this was a Canadian film, which is just crazy, because that still unfortunately does ring true. Not quite as much anymore, but I remember being a kid and being like, "Oh, Groner, it's a Canadian film. I don't want to watch that." And there was a point during this screening where they were collecting audience reaction that somebody decided that they weren't going to watch the film, and they got up as soon as the beginning started because they recognized the landing or something, or saw the call letters on the plane and knew that it was a Canadian plane or something, and they were like, oh, I don't want to watch this, and they started leaving. And someone outside the theater who was running the show had said, well, why are you leaving so quick? The movie hasn't even started. And he's like, oh, I can tell it's a Canadian film, I don't want to see it. And he's like, please just go back in, sit down and watch the film, because I really want your opinion, because we're like hiding the fact that it's a Canadian film, and forced him to watch it. And the feedback, of course, from that particular moviegoer was that it was a great movie, and they're glad that they stayed to watch it. They just typically don't watch Canadian things. And this is in our capital. This is in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. They should be proud of it. Like, we're pretty proud of any horror that happens here. And granted, we're horror fans and can sit through some stinkers sometimes, no problem. But this was back then. They should have been proud of that sort of Canadian content. But no, they're like, meh, I don't like Canadian stuff. I'm leaving.
There's something about the Film Board of Canada where, when I was a kid, I always had that, like, you could tell, like, the film quality wasn't as good, or it was being shot in some godforsaken small town and everything looked wet or snowy. And then you'd watch the movie, and it's like such inexpensive, boring personal stories with nothing exciting going on. So I was like, ugh, I don't want to, like, watch a bunch of people, like, have conversations in old rusty cars. That was always what I always associated Canadian films with.
Pretty much it. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that in a weird way, trying to tell stories for Canadians, so the Canadian Film Board will fund you, give you money if this seems Canadian. But the problem is they tried too hard to make sure it's really rooted in Canada, as opposed to, seems to be at the expense of everything else, as opposed to making something truly entertaining or universal. Let's make it as Canadian as possible, but it never spoke to any experiences I ever had as a Canadian. And this is just like a great example of something that was just a cool fucking story where you could relate to it because you could imagine yourself in this survivalist situation. It really worked out. And if anything else, like, as opposed to just thinking about it as like, oh, this is the Canadian Deliverance, which makes it sound so derivative of something else. This really is a wholly unique story that just shares some elements, the most basic primal elements, that guys in woods, that's about as similar as they're going to be. And I really just think that people should try to seek out this film and judge it on its own merits, as opposed to saying, what is this film like? But what do we got next for him?
Coming up next, we're going to take a 180 and head back into the Common Era. And indeed, this year, a movie that is so new that it's a little creepy that we're even doing it to me. I'm going to have to watch it again because it's now on Shudder. I saw it in the theater, and that is Late Night with the Devil. I'm very excited to talk about this one, and then we'll get back into something moldy oldie, because maybe we'll find some old movie that relates to this topic.
It's very possible we are going to the bleeding edge of modern day cinema, but we're going back to the 70s to do it.
Isn't that fitting?
Always. I'm Wes Knight.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And you've been listening to Dead Air. If you like this show, you can find more episodes and other content on splatterpictures.net, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts. We also upload all episodes to YouTube now, if you'd prefer to listen that way. You can find us across social media like Instagram, X, and TikTok, and the show is edited by Lydia Peaver and hosted by Lydia Peaver and me, Wes Knight. We'll see you next time.